Next speaker is Dr. Mark Schipp, former Australian Chief Veterinary Officer. He held the position of Australia's Chief Veterinary Officer for 12 years, Mark, and serving as President of the World Organisation for Animal Health's World Assembly. Mark is a champion of the One Health approach, which recognises that health of humans, animals and the environment are inextricably linked. We've asked him to provide some insights on the impact of livestock diseases to market access and trade as they spread across the globe. Please welcome Mark to the platform. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on the important topic of the global spread of livestock diseases. It's great to have this opportunity to meet a number of old acquaintances, and thank you very much for the reception last night. That was a lovely event. Just to give you background, for those of you that I haven't met or that don't know me, I was the Australian Chief Veterinary Officer for 12 years and a member of the WOA Council for all of that time, including 3 years as President. Had more than 30 years in the Commonwealth Department of Agriculture, most of that in the export meat sector. 6 years posted overseas as Agriculture Councillor in Seoul, Korea and Beijing, China. And now I'm retired and not doing very much, but to make it clear what my interests and activities are, I'm a board member of the Australian Veterinary Association and of Vets Beyond Borders, a councillor with the World Veterinary Association and with the Commonwealth Veterinary Association, and I'm currently participating in the review of the World Organisation for Animal Health's governance as Secretary of that committee. So my presentation this morning is on animal diseases and why do they matter? Why do we keep livestock? Half the world's habitable land is used for agriculture, and more than 75% of that land is dedicated to livestock. We keep livestock to make a living, whether that be subsistence farming or commercial agriculture, but there are other benefits to keeping livestock, such as draft power, hides and skins, manure as a form of savings, and also for meat, milk and fibre. Animal diseases then can impact not only animals, but their owners. Animals may lose their health, their productivity, their breeding capacity, and their welfare can be impacted. But humans can lose their livelihoods, they can be thrown into poverty and food insecurity, and they can be directly affected if the animal diseases are zoonotic. Recently, the world has experienced surges in the cost of living due to shortages of eggs arising from highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreaks in Europe, the Americas and elsewhere. Australia has remained free of HPAI H5N1, but this week there has been confirmation that this virus is present in Australia's Antarctic territory. So perhaps it's only a matter of time before we also have H5N1 in Australia. And losses from animal diseases can be massive. Foot and mouth disease in the UK cost $9.2 billion. The same disease in Taiwan and South Korea resulted in losses of $6.6 and $2.2 billion respectively. Schmallenberg virus in Europe reduced semen exports by 20% at the same time as causing stillbirths and congenital malformations in cattle, sheep and goats. These types of impact are greatly amplified if the disease is zoonotic. And often when I was briefing the Minister on some disease outbreak, the first question was, what's the impact in humans? And there are also environmental challenges with the disposal of carcasses from mass deaths or slaughter. It might be worth visiting our experience with rinderpest. It's an ancient disease of cattle. It is also the origin of measles in humans. It was brought to Europe from Asia by invaders whose Asian grey steppe oxen were immune to the disease. In Europe, it wiped out cattle, bringing famine and disease, and then it was introduced to Africa in the 19th century, and it had a devastating effect, wiping out untold numbers of domestic and wild animals, including over 2.5 million cattle, leaving only 5% of the previous cattle herd intact. The loss of Ethiopia's cattle led to famine, which claimed lives of almost 1/3 of the human population. The devastation wrought by rinderpest led to the establishment of the first veterinary school in France in 1761. In 1994, FAO, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, established the Global Rinderpest Eradication Program with the goal of eradicating rinderpest by 2010. And in 2011, eradication was declared, ending a 300-year battle. The first animal disease globally eradicated, the second ever disease to be eradicated following smallpox in humans. The ravages of rinderpest led directly to the establishment of the World Organization for Animal Health, known initially as OIE, in 1924, and WOA has continued to lead efforts to improve animal health and welfare. WOA lists 174 diseases of terrestrial animals due to their importance, and WOA's primary task is to develop standards to facilitate trade in animals and animal products to avoid spread of these diseases. Of those 174 diseases, there are a smaller group that are termed transboundary animal diseases. They have an impact on trade, on food security, and the economy generally. They are easily spread between countries, and because of this, their control requires cooperation between nations. Often, they also have significant public health consequences. So how then are these diseases of concern spread? Live animal movement is the most obvious and the most effective means of spread. WOA develops standards to manage that risk, and for that reason, it is the illegal or informal movement of animals that is responsible for most common means of transboundary animal disease spread. These are often not well documented, but some examples in our region include the reintroduction of foot-and-mouth disease into Indonesia in 2022 through informal movement of goats from Malaysia, the spread of rabies to Flores Island in Indonesia in 1997 when 3 dogs from a rabies endemic area were introduced. This outbreak resulted in the deaths of 113 people, and 50% of the dog population was culled, and rabies remains endemic on Flores. Disease transmission through legal or formal trade and movement of animals is possible, particularly where the disease is incubating or asymptomatic. When the UK had its FMD outbreak in 2001, the disease spread across the country and to France and to Netherlands within 2 months through the legal movement of animals. Classical swine fever spread from the Netherlands to Italy and Spain through the shipment of infected piglets in 1997. Again, legal movement of animals in a preclinical phase. Another means of infection through animal movement is wildlife migration, including that of birds. Australia is fortunate to be the only continent so far unaffected by HPAI, H5N1, as I mentioned earlier, which has been spread between countries by migratory wild birds and affected millions of dairy cattle and other wild and domestic animals. In the Australian context, feral pigs and deer could play a significant role in an FMD outbreak if one were to occur here. Contaminated products is another means of transmission, and this is the reason for our efforts at the border with passengers and mail and imported goods. Animal disease can be introduced through contaminated products, For this reason, we have controls over swill feeding, that is, feeding certain animal products to pigs, but animals can be infected through imported feeds thought to be safe, such as spray-dried porcine plasma that introduced porcine epidemic diarrhoea to the US. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE, was spread by cattle consuming meat and bone meal. Chronic wasting disease of deer can be spread through deer grazing contaminated pastures, that is, contaminated with the urine of infected animals. Semen and biological products, such as vaccines, can also be a source of disease, and for this reason, we have strong biosecurity controls over the import of these types of product. It's difficult to control the entry of insect vectors, particularly if they are carried on the wind. Here in Australia, we know that we regularly see exotic strains of the blue tongue virus brought in by Culicoides midges carried by cyclonic winds. Similarly, lumpy skin disease has entered a number of countries in Asia and Europe, well, perhaps Europe, through movement of insect vectors. The environment itself can be contaminated. Foot-and-mouth disease and African swine fever viruses persist in the environment in an organic manner and in wildlife carcasses. These indirect transmission points complicate control efforts as the inclusion of environmental decontamination and wildlife carcass disposal may be required as part of an effective response. In the Australian context, this means that the carcasses of feral pigs infected with FMD or African swine fever may remain a source of infection. There can also be laboratory leaks and accidents. The 2007 FMD outbreak in the UK resulted from live virus escaping a broken pipe. I spoke earlier about the eradication of rinderpest, but the virus remains in several laboratories around the world, and its use as a biological weapon has been considered. So what are the major disease threats today? Transboundary animal diseases continue to spread today, and some of these pose significant threats due to trade barriers and response requirements in the event of an incursion. Foot and mouth disease is the first disease that springs to mind, and the first disease for which WOA offered status recognition. But it's not a particularly fatal disease, rather it is a trade disease. That is, the biggest impact is upon loss of trade and market access. Foot and mouth disease remains endemic through much of Asia, Africa and the Middle East. Countries that are currently free without vaccination remain under constant threat of an incursion. Brazil was recognised as FMD-free in May of this year, which is expected to open up market access opportunities, and we're seeing some of those in the US at the moment. In our own region, foot and mouth disease re-emerged in Indonesia in May 2022. These maps are sourced from an Australian enterprise, Animal Disease Insights. They are based on official notifications to WOA, and I've used a 5-year window. There are several shortcomings. It's based on official notifications, and some countries do not provide notifications. Some provide them infrequently or late, and that was the reason for the 5-year window. But Venezuela may be an example here. Venezuela is believed to have foot-and-mouth disease. It has not participated in regional eradication campaign, but it does not provide reports. There are informal movements of people and animals across the border from Venezuela into neighbouring countries. African horse sickness is another disease which WOA offers status recognition. A disease of horses might not be of particular interest to this audience, but horses are important to the Australian economy and to the livestock industries. Any incursion would have significant impacts upon working horses and the Australian horse racing industry. It's also of interest in that it is a vector-borne disease. For this reason, Australia has strict insect control measures in place whenever we import horses. It's carried by midges, and due to climate change, their range is growing. African horse sickness is a highly fatal disease of horses. It was introduced into Thailand through import of zebra and spread to Malaysia before being successfully eradicated in both countries. Thailand had import requirements that prevented import of horses from Africa, but they did not have import requirements for zebra, and thus the disease was introduced with live animals. PPR, Peste de Petits Ruminants, is a highly contagious disease of sheep and goats. It's related to rinderpest and causes 90% morbidity and mortality in naive flocks. There is a global eradication campaign. The disease is present in Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia and Europe. The affected countries are home to 68% of the world's small ruminant population. So my interest in presenting this was its huge impact on the largely vulnerable populations and its low profile in Australia. Although there is a global eradication campaign, my sense is that this campaign and the similar campaign around rabies have lost momentum. They rely upon goodwill and philanthropy, and it seems at the moment that this is somewhat missing. Lumpy skin disease is much better understood in Australia, and the risk posed to the Australian livestock export industry is well understood. Lumpy skin disease is present in much of Africa and the Middle East. 10 years ago, it spread to Europe, Russia and China before moving to Southeast Asia. Of concern to Australia is its presence in Indonesia and its possible further expansion east. It has significant impact on animal welfare and health, with skin lesions causing permanent damage to hides and skin, and dairy cattle suffering significant losses. Transmission is primarily by insect vectors such as mosquitoes and stable flies. In June, lumpy skin disease entered Europe, into Italy and then France. Switzerland responded by commencing national vaccinations in July, and Spain declared infection in October. European countries have responded with 70-kilometre radius vaccination zones, or national vaccination, immediate culling and strict movement restrictions. They are favoured with winter conditions that do not support insect vectors. Outbreaks slashed dairy production by 30%. Australia removed Italy, France, Switzerland and Spain from the list of countries recognised as free of lumpy skin disease, imposing restrictions on imports of live animals, genetic material and dairy products. Although the introduction into Europe might be explained by insect vector movement, the spread of disease between countries has been due to animal movement. African swine fever is highly contagious and fatal. It can spread by direct contact or through infected meat or exposure to faeces, urine or blood, or to the tick vector. The virus had been confined to Africa until the mid-20th century, when it spread to Europe, South America and the Caribbean in 2021. A second wave reached Eastern Europe and Russia, and then on to China and Southeast Asia. China has half the world's pig population. The most recent incursion was into Taiwan last month, and that's not shown on this map. In our own region, African swine fever has reached Indonesia and Timor-Leste in 2019 and Papua New Guinea in 2020, placing African swine fever on our doorstep. Australia has multi-layered defence, but we should not be complacent. Australia is not immune. There is a tendency to call Australia disease-free, which is not correct, and we should be actively vigilant. Foot and mouth disease is present on our doorstep. If we were to suffer an incursion, exports of animals and animal products would be suspended and curtailed for years. We have high levels of preparedness, including border controls, offshore threat reduction and response readiness. We have provided funds, expertise and vaccines to our near neighbours. Surveillance and awareness are vitally important, especially in remote areas. We have well-developed response arrangements under AusVet Plan and agreed cost-sharing under EADRA. We maintain a vaccine antigen bank which would allow rapid availability of high-potency vaccines. Australia's proactive lumpy skin disease National Action Plan is well regarded globally. In 2022, the Australian Government commissioned epidemiological modelling into the risk of LSD incursion through wind-borne biting insects. The research indicated that a single insect was unlikely to start an incursion, that the risk increased as lumpy skin disease moved east along the Indonesian archipelago, and that mosquitoes are the highest risk vector. Surveillance in the north is critical, and for this reason we must maintain the Northern Australian Quarantine Strategy and the Northern Australia Biosecurity Surveillance Network. In October 2022, the National Lumpy Skin Disease Action Plan was released. In June 2023, vaccine supply arrangements were signed to ensure initial supply of lumpy skin disease vaccine, if required, to Australia, Timor-Leste and Papua New Guinea. The AusVet Plan Lumpy Skin Disease Response Strategy was updated through 2022 through to 2024, and in June 2024 a lumpy skin disease vector management guide was developed. Like foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease, African swine fever is present in our near neighbours. Unlike those diseases, there's no registered and effective vaccine for African swine fever, which is readily transmitted in food products, so vigilance at our border and awareness among travellers is important. When ASF approached Australia, preparedness efforts were stepped up, with industry and government exercises run in several states. The AusVet Plan ASF strategy was revised, and modelling and research undertaken into the role that feral pigs might play in Australia and the effects of exposure on virus viability in carcasses. Feral pigs are a potential reservoir, making control measures and monitoring important for preventing the disease from becoming established in Australia. So Australia has a multi-layered defence consisting of pre-border, border and post-border elements. Pre-border, supporting regional disease control programs such as CCFMD and control programs in Indonesia, providing vaccines and establishing vaccine banks for FMD and LSD, and building partner capacity through veterinary training and laboratory enhancements. At the border, we have passenger declarations and screening, and they're quite visible reminders. We also have import risk assessments and permits, and that's much less visible, and detection of illegal food imports, and that's an occasional exercise, largely for the purposes of awareness raising. And then post-border, we have National Australian Quarantine Strategy, where feral and wild animals are sampled for a range of diseases. We have national surveillance in sale yards, registered premises, abattoirs and farms, and that gives us a high level of confidence as to our animal health status. And we have agreed emergency response plans under AusVet Plan, and we have agreed cost-sharing arrangements under EADRA. An incursion of foot and mouth disease or lumpy skin disease would have catastrophic consequences for the Australian live export industry. Any delay in detecting and reporting an incursion results in a larger, more costly outbreak and longer delays in regaining market access. So surveillance should be a priority. For this reason, the loss of rural and regional vets pose a significant threat. In the event of an incursion, export certification would be removed. This may result in stranded consignments upon the water. Government and industry would have to work together to resolve these consignments, while at the same time battling an emergency animal disease. Bear in mind that the priority in the face of an outbreak is combating the incursion, not demonstrating areas of freedom or negotiating new market access conditions. For this reason, maintaining Australian biosecurity defences is of paramount importance. Effort and investment in the insurance of biosecurity may prevent future incursions that could destroy Australian livestock sectors. The global animal health environment has changed. Although we were successful in eradicating rinderpest, the global campaigns for rabies and PPR eradication have lacked momentum. The global political environment is not conducive to long-term cooperative arrangements to control and eradicate transboundary animal diseases. Informal trade is the greatest contributor to the spread of transboundary animal diseases, and this is exacerbated by barriers to legal trade, inadequate surveillance, poor biosecurity, improper use of existing tools such as vaccines, and incomplete or late reporting of disease outbreaks. Australia has played a positive role in the region and globally with accurate and timely reporting of our animal health status and our support for capacity building and emergency animal disease responses. In terms of research needs, we need reliable, rapid, shelf-stable diagnostic tests, vaccines that allow disease control without mass culling, and decision-making in uncertain or low-confidence environments is another area of research required. So some take-home messages from my perspective. Australia is not immune from disease incursions, so we need to build trust through transparency and cooperation. We need to strengthen biosecurity nationally and on-farm. We need to understand what will happen in the event of a disease incursion, particularly for livestock in transit. And we need to think about restricted market access based on vaccination or disease-free zones. We should be investing in disease surveillance offshore and onshore, vaccine technology and the regulatory system to utilise this technology. So in Australia we have developed the mRNA platform for animal disease vaccination, but our regulatory system does not support that. It is used to dealing with vaccines that have been in the market and known for many years before they approach registration, whereas the whole purpose of an mRNA platform is that it's very rapid and very adaptable, and the regulatory system is not able to cope with that. We need rapid, reliable and shelf-stable diagnostics, and we need some basic research into the mechanisms of transmission of diseases, including insect vectors. And we should be advocating for strong national biosecurity arrangements. We should be advocating for industry participation in preparedness and response arrangements, and we should be advocating for enhanced veterinary presence in rural and regional Australia and for surveillance and response capability. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions or have a discussion.
Well, thank you, Mark. There's some scary stuff in there. But anyway, it's nice to know that we've got a knowledge of it and actions possible. Are there questions, please? One right here, please. Thanks, mate. You might as well stay there. Just keep it on.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for that. It's very interesting. Michael Hopper, one of the export vets from Perth. I'm just wondering, with the incursion of recent pests like the polyphagous shot-hole borer here in Perth, varroa mite in bees in Newcastle, and our failure to contain those outbreaks, have we learnt lessons? Do you have reasons for confidence that we'll do better in the face of incursions of foot and mouth or lumpy skin disease?
I think there are good reminders that Australia is not immune, and that was the point I wanted to convey. I think there's other examples in the animal sector. In dogs, we've got canine ehrlichiosis. We've got no idea how that entered. Australia, just turned up in the middle of Australia, and it's been spread right through Indigenous communities with very significant consequences. We had Japanese encephalitis, and we thought we understood Japanese encephalitis. It was in the north, it was occasional, and then suddenly it appeared right down the east coast of Australia through to South Australia, resulting in deaths and impairment of humans and impacts on more than 70 piggeries over a period of a couple of months. So a very devastating incursion. I think all of these demonstrate that Australia is vulnerable and we need to be aware and alert so that we can pick these up as quickly as possible and respond to those. It also demonstrates how difficult it is to prevent incursion. And Japanese encephalitis is mosquito-borne. There's not much we can do at the border to stop mosquitoes. But we probably could have done better at the border with canine ehrlichiosis. We don't know how that came in, but it must have come in through an imported dog at some point. And then industry also has to play a role. We know that Varroa was introduced, and we're almost certain that it was introduced by beekeepers smuggling in bees to try and improve their hives and introduce new bloodlines and queens, and as a consequence introduce the parasite. And it's disappointing, but it demonstrates that we all need to play a role in maintaining those defences.
Thanks, Mark. James Nason from Beef Central. Just wanted to ask what your understanding is of how attempts by Indonesia to control FMD and LSD are going, and do you think there is actually any possibility they will be able to eradicate those diseases?
I don't believe that eradication is the goal. I think control is the goal. Eradication was achieved with Australia's support through the 80s and 90s. But I don't think it's so easily attained now as it was then. In part, that's due to decentralisation, where Australia, we deal with Indonesia on a government-to-government basis, and we provide support at that national level. But the reality is that disease control and response is managed at the provincial level, and to try and coordinate nationally across all of those provinces is a very difficult task. Australia provided millions of doses of vaccines, but then they were distributed across all of those provinces. Whereas our advice was that if you're going to get on top of this, then you need to have ring vaccination, you need to focus your vaccination campaign and deal with it in a strategic sense. But the political reality doesn't support that. So Australia will continue to support Indonesia's efforts to control the disease, but I don't think eradication is a viable option at this time.
Mark, Peter Letchford, Pastoral Veterinary Solutions, Kimberley. Mark, just in the same vein, lumpy skin disease in Indonesia, the current status, how far has it spread across the archipelago? Has it got into Bali yet? And what lessons can we take from that as far as insect vector-borne spread?
So the spread east is of concern, but it's not progressed as rapidly as we had feared. But I'm not keeping in touch with it now to the extent that I was when I was the CVO. And I see we have a number of Indonesian colleagues here who might be able to be better informed. But the challenge is always that this is an insect-borne disease and only takes a change in wind direction to drastically alter the outcomes of the disease. And uncontrolled movement of animals. Again, this is an area which is very difficult to manage in the Indonesian context, where animals must continually move towards market, whereas in Europe it's much easier to impose restrictions and gain those movement controls. So I think there are a number of challenges there.
Another question, Mark, for you. You mentioned the importance of rural veterinarians. As a vet who's been working for over 40 years in the remote north of Australia, we're pretty thin on the ground. How serious is your role in ABA and also in Vet Surgeons Board? How do we address that rural shortage? I know there's a shortage of vets generally. There shouldn't be. We've got more universities, double the universities when I went through nearly 45 years ago. Why are we so short of vets? I've got different theories, but what are we doing to address that? I feel a lot of it's got to do with entry in the first place, course structure. What are we doing to address it? We've got a lot of overseas students. Shouldn't we be addressing our own needs first?
Yeah, I agree with a number of the points that you made there. We've got more veterinary graduates now than we've ever had, and yet we continue to have these shortages. Rural and regional practices closing down because they can't recruit. But it's not an issue that's confined to Australia. We've shared experiences with UK, US, Ireland, New Zealand, Canada, and they're all very much in the same boat. We met with them and said, we're suffering a real vet shortage. Any chance that you're able to support us? And they said, well, we had exactly the same thought. What we're doing to address that is my successor, Beth Cookson, is the Chief Veterinary Officer now, and she has established a task force looking at collecting data around veterinary shortages and the reason for those shortages and what can we do to address that. At the moment, we don't have good data. We don't understand why we've got so many graduates and so many vacancies at the same time. I agree with you. I think part of it is selection of students in terms of their background and their expectations. But I realise also that the world's moved on quite a lot since I graduated, and the expectations when I graduated now would get me struck off. So, the world moves on, and we have to acknowledge that.
Thanks, Mark. It's Wayne Collier, CEO of LiveCorp. You showed and went through a number of maps up there, and we know that there's more and more sort of challenging outbreaks globally that are having significant impacts, particularly for some of the countries that are reliant on imports. And yesterday I think we had 10 million sheep being imported to Saudi Arabia last year. So we've got sort of this challenge of increasing outbreaks, increasing challenges with disease, but also an increasing need for livestock to feed into food security and smallholder programs, things like that. In terms of pragmatic ways to manage disease and manage safe movements across countries, not necessarily from an Australian perspective, but even in the Middle East or Southeast Asia, what is WOA, or what are we doing, or can we be doing globally or regionally to improve and support those regional partners in dealing with these diseases that seem to be becoming more prevalent and harder to avoid having to deal with from a food security perspective?
Yeah, I think part of the answer is technology, having better vaccines and better diagnostics. If we're able to test large numbers of animals very cheaply, and I think we're getting to that point now, COVID saw that you could run thousands, millions of tests at low cost. So if we're able to test large numbers of animals cheaply, that provides importers with a confidence that the animals that they're receiving are disease-free. And also, if we're able to develop vaccines that are potent and rapidly deployable, and I think the mRNA platform gives us that. So that allows us a relatively cheap but rapidly responsive vaccine platform to protect animals before they're exported. So I think those two aspects of technology are promising. At the same time, WOA is working in those regions that are importing animals to work with them on what are your requirements in terms of you need to import animals, you've got a protein need there, so why are you putting up barriers to trade? Why are you putting in place disease requirements when you've got this disease in your country, you're not controlling the disease, so why are you putting in place restrictions around that trade and trying to get them to articulate what is the purpose of your import regime and try and marry up your protein needs with any biosecurity needs and being realistic about those.
Mark, thank you very
Oh,
much.
all right, yeah, great.
Graham Cook, I'm current Chief Veterinary Officer for the state of Victoria. Mark, I really just wanted to say something in support because there is a tendency to think that all Chief Veterinary Officers have a glass half empty mentality. But Mark's message could not be more of the current time. For the last 2 years, I've been chairing the World Organization of Animal Health Veterinary Diseases Preparedness Group. And it is absolutely true that the current burden of disease that is outside Australia is unprecedented. It is happening everywhere. And countries with very developed veterinary services and biosecurity systems like Germany, countries in Asia have fallen over. One of the important elements is thinking ahead and be prepared. The last time foot and mouth disease was in Australia was in Werribee in 1870, and everything moved at the speed of a horse. I know that over the last couple of days in Victoria, at least in Victoria, there have been many hundreds of thousands of animal movements on a daily basis. So if we get these things into our system, they will wreak havoc very, very quickly. So I would just ask you to, as you're driving home, flying home, to have some thoughts about how is your area of the industry preparing, how is it building in resilience, and how would it deal with the shock of a sudden interruption in movements and transport and so on. So if you're asked to be part of exercises, you're asked to be part of jurisdictional preparedness, please embrace that opportunity because much better to be aware of things in advance. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham.
Mark, Gary Robinson, Robinson Rural Holdings. I just wanted to get your view on, given our extreme exposure to a catastrophic effect in the event of an incursion, not just us, but with meat and all other animal products, do you feel that we're adequately prepared diplomatically and at government level to re-establish trade as quickly as possible, given that people in the supply chain in our business could be broke within days, weeks or months? And yeah, that's pretty much the crux.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, thank you. When we had the movement of FMD and LSD into our neighbourhood, we undertook quite a big effort to look at what would happen if we had an incursion and what would be the implications of that, and likewise with ASF. And some of them are quite surprising. What we found with ASF, for example, was that if we had an incursion of ASF, all our beef exports to Korea would stop. You think, well, how and why? There's no overlap between beef and pork, and ASF isn't in beef. And it's because of the way the certificate was written. It said Australia is free of ASF as one of the statements on the certificate. And so we would have had to stop exporting beef to Korea if we had an ASF incursion. So that's been fixed, but there are a number of examples like that. But they're very difficult negotiations to front up to a country and say, if we were to have FMD, would you still accept our product? So what are you telling me? Do you suspect that you've got FMD? Should we be suspending trade now? It's a very difficult conversation to approach and to embark upon. And having started that conversation, then they respond with, well, we've got FMD, will you accept our product? No. Well, so how much further do you want to take this conversation? So they are very difficult conversations to have, but I think the department's done a lot to address that and prepare, and they've got a cascade that's ready to be triggered. But at the same time, and part of my pitch this morning is to say that industry have a role as well. You need to understand that if we have an incursion, everything stops. So what's the priority? Are we going to put all of our effort into fighting the disease? Or are we going to put some of our effort into fighting the disease and some of our effort into demonstrating that this state or this region is free and then trying to renegotiate market access from that state or that region, or we're going to try and argue that we can vaccinate animals and export them. All of those are quite different scenarios and require extraordinary amounts of effort and input, and I think industry should be part of that conversation, and at the same time the department's been told to take a 5% cut. So, you know, it's a constrained environment.
Thanks, Dr. Mark. Paul McCormick from Elders. I guess I've got an observation and a question concern. On a recent trip to Indonesia, we visited many feedlots, wet markets, abattoirs, etc., and everywhere was, particularly the feedlots, had some level of biosecurity measure in place, whether it was a simple foot bath or full PPE in some cases, and that was hugely encouraging to see that. Then the observation is that our Indonesian colleagues are very concerned and obviously take it very seriously, and they've demonstrated that it was easy to see. Then my concern relates when we get back to Australia. Landed in Melbourne, ticked the entry card, couldn't have put more red flags on it for myself as possible. Been on rural properties, you know, engaged in agricultural visits, etc., and went down the declared line, and an AQUIS officer says, are your boots clean? I said, well, look, I think they are, but that'll be for you to judge. And he goes, oh, well, I had livestock manager written on there. Look, you guys are aware of the risk, and just waved me through. So that was just a huge red flag. Like, I couldn't have declared myself any better that I was in the hot zone. And we're just in a arrival hall with thousands, and it was just pushing the numbers through. So my question is, how do we get other agencies within, you know, to take it as seriously as we do, or we need to? Yeah, if you could speak to that, if you have anything to offer. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think your experience is not unusual, and I never worked directly in that biosecurity area, but my understanding is that the discretion is given to the officer to say, well, you're an informed traveller, you are aware of the risks, and it's in your interest to contribute to controlling that risk. But I think many other travellers are not informed and aren't aware of the risk and are not able to manage that risk and need that management to be provided by government. So efforts need to be continue to be applied to increase that awareness, both in the public but also, I think, with our politicians and our resource providers, to say this risk is not declining. In fact, this risk is amplifying, and that risk is not only offshore, the risk is also onshore with the behaviour and the expectations of travellers and purchasers. Everybody expects that when they order something online that it's going to arrive tomorrow from overseas, that when they step off the plane that they can immediately head through duty-free and grab a taxi. And you know what it's like to be held there with 1,000 other people in the hall awaiting inspection. So I think we've got to manage that expectation, and you know, we've tried to do that through videos and banners and the like. But a large part of it is about embedding that in the culture, and that works from the minister down. It's encouraging to get in a taxi and have a taxi driver talk to you about quarantine and biosecurity, and that should be the expectation and the norm.
Mark, Justin Morrissey, Uguala Pastoral Company. My question relates back to the vaccines. Experience we've seen from overseas is that timeliness is a major concern when it comes to controlling diseases. Some experiences in Europe and within Southeast Asia. What levels of vaccines do we currently have available for LSD and FMD in Australia? I know you mentioned the mRNA vaccine, although being developed, it's not approved yet. So I guess two parts: what stocks do we currently have, and what's your hopes of that mRNA vaccine being approved in the near future?
So in terms of lumpy skin disease, what we've established is a very small bank just to provide an initial response. I think it's about 100,000 doses, so it's quite a small amount. And you know, it's good that we've got that assured supply, but at the moment, if you go out to the market, you won't find LSD vaccine because Europe has bought everything. Right around the world, they've purchased every available vaccine to use in their campaign, and that's one of the benefits and the advantages with lumpy skin disease is that it's a single serotype, so any good vaccine will work. The challenge with foot and mouth disease is that there are multiple serotypes, so you need to be able to match the serotype to the outbreak that you've got, and the quality of the vaccines varies greatly. The strength of the mRNA platform is that you'll be able to change out those serotypes to apply the appropriate serotype to the platform and rapidly scale up that vaccine. And so to have that development here in Australia, I think is outstanding. They haven't done work on lumpy skin disease, they've done work on border disease, and they've demonstrated the platform there. They've now undertaking some offshore trials in foot and mouth disease, but as yet they've not scaled up those, and they've not explored lumpy skin disease.
One more here, and that'll be the last one.
Mark, thanks very much. That was a great talk. And one of the things that, Ben Maiden from AusVet, one of the things that really illustrated was it's almost a game of whack-a-mole going on out there. There's a new outbreak tomorrow, there's a new outbreak last week, there's a new outbreak coming in the next month. Is there a role for industry in ensuring that government remains focused with a very limited pool of resources on targeting a couple of priority issues, or are we going to keep spending another $1 million here and another $1 million there and another $1 million here down the track and never really make a substantial gain in managing one or two of the most important problems for our industries?
I'm sure you've got some suggestions on how that $1 million could be spent, Ben. Certainly it is a game of whack-a-mole. I was in Paris last week at WOA and sitting next to the South African CVO, and he said, you know, we've got this awful foot-mouth disease outbreak. We've never experienced anything like it. And then he got a phone call and he said, oh, we've got the vaccine, that's great. And then he got another phone call. The serotype doesn't match, we've got the wrong vaccine. And then he got a message saying, now we've got Rift Valley fever. Well, you know, where do you start? It's just an impossible situation to deal with, and you really feel for those that are in those environments. Thankfully, most of our threats are offshore, and I think that gives us the opportunity to be strategic and to focus our efforts. And my argument is that in Australia, we've got a very good platform through Animal Health Australia of industry-government partnership. We've got good relationships in the main between industry and government, and together we should be identifying those priorities on areas for research and investment, because we can't cover every possible risk, but we can pick out the strategic gaps and try and address those. And we'll make best efforts, and I think almost all of that research is beneficial in some way or another. But you know, obviously there'll be continue to be gaps, and we'll continue to make mistakes, and there'll be weaknesses in our defence. But we've got to do what we can, and I think the best way we can do that is to work together to do that.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark. Please join with me in thanking Mark.